Hello, my dear dreamer. I want to tell you a story, not the one you remember, not the tale they dress in ribbons and happily ever afters. No, this version smells of smoke, of forgotten wishes, and broken clocks. A story buried in soot, retold only in whispers through the chimney. They called her Cinderella, but the cinders remember her first, and what they gave her she could never return. If you like these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave your thoughts for other dreamers like you. Now let's begin. Long before Ella was born, before kingdoms rose and fell, there was the first flame, an ancient living fire buried beneath the roots of the world. It was not warmth, it was not light, it was hunger. It did not burn wood, it did not burn stone. It burned memory, it burned identity. In the earliest days, witches and warlocks sought the first flame not for its heat, but for its power to strip a person of their name, to erase them from the world entirely. A creature without a name is a hollow thing. A creature without a name is easy to shape. These nameless husks, once called cinders, were used as slaves, soldiers, offerings. But the flame was never satisfied with the scraps offered by men. It wanted more. It wanted consent. The cinders whispered at night. Ella heard them first in the ashes. She had learned long ago not to speak to the shadows in the corners of her stepmother's home, not to answer the knocks that came from inside the fireplace, not to listen too long when the wind carried more than just the wind. But silence was dangerous too, and in that silence the cinders began to whisper. At first they spoke nonsense, scratches of language, like burnt paper fluttering in her mind. Then they began to say her name, Ella, softly, lovingly, like her mother once had. Only her mother had been dead for years. The grave never whispered back. So, who was calling to her? The soot from the hearth clung to her skin, stained her lungs, curled in her dreams like smoke. She lived among it now, no longer a daughter, no longer a girl, not really. Her stepmother called her Cinderella, Ash Girl, but the ashes called her something else, Child of the Flame. The first time they said that, she bled from the nose and ears. The pressure behind her eyes was unbearable, but she didn't scream. She didn't tell, she just listened. Because the world had already taken everything from her, her name, her family, her freedom, what more could the fire take? What more could it offer? The house stood at the edge of a dead orchard, grey as ash and leaning like it was too tired to keep standing. Ella stopped at the rusted gate, the wind tugging at her coat and whispering secrets through the skeletal branches above. This was the place, the hollow house, her grandmother's last known address. It wasn't just any house. It was the kind of place that felt wrong. Not haunted exactly, but too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting. The lock on the gate had long since rusted away. Ella stepped through, boots crunching over frost-bitten weeds and forgotten fruit. She could see the front door slightly ajar, the darkness inside thick as tar. She hesitated, not out of fear, though something deep inside her was already whispering to leave, but because of the note she had found in her father's old journal. Just a single sentence scribbled in his final days before he vanished. If the flame calls to you, do not answer, and never go to the hollow house. Yet here she was, and the door was already open. She pushed it wider. Inside, the air was colder, heavy. Dust floated like it was underwater. The walls were covered in yellowed newspaper clippings, each one about people who had vanished without a trace. Some were local, some were dated centuries ago. All of them had one thing in common. Their names had been blacked out with thick, oily strokes of ink. A strange smell hung in the air, not rot, not mold, burnt paper. Ella moved carefully, flashlight cutting through the dark. She passed a parlor with a rotting couch and a mirror that didn't reflect her light. Another room with dolls nailed to the walls. No eyes, no mouths, just blank porcelain. At the end of the hall was a staircase leading down. The basement. She didn't remember moving, didn't remember choosing to go there. Her feet carried her, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. At the base of the stairs was a door, not wood, but iron, old and cold and edged with symbols that squirmed when she looked at them too long. Her hand hovered over the handle. Then she heard it. A voice, crackling, dry, whispering through the keyhole like a fire sighing in sleep. Come closer, I remember your name. Ella's heart skipped. The voice was familiar, soft, like her mother's, like memory. She opened the door and stepped into the dark. The basement was vast, far bigger than the house should have allowed. It was like stepping into a cavern that the earth had forgotten. The walls were smooth stone, slick with condensation and heat, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air shimmered as though she were standing near a bonfire, yet there was no flame, just the smell, old, sweet, and wrong, like candles made of flesh. Ella took slow steps forward, her flashlight flickering. She aimed it at the ground and stopped cold. The floor was littered with letters, scattered parchment, scraps of fabric, bones with names carved into them. Some names were smudged, others seared into the objects, blackened by fire. One charred scrap caught her eye. She picked it up carefully and read the words. She gave her name willingly. The voice returned closer now, just behind her ear. Would you? She spun around. No one was there. But something moved in the dark. Shapes, dozens of them, stood along the cavern's edge. Pale, almost translucent figures. Not ghosts, not quite people. They had no eyes, no mouths, just hollow outlines where faces should be. Some were wrapped in ribbons, some in chains, and in the center of them all, crouched low to the stone, was something that burned. Not like fire. It burned inward, eating its own light, drawing memory into itself. The first flame. It did not roar, it did not crackle, it whispered, and it was speaking to her. You carry an old name, it said, a name your blood once gave to me. Ella's knees weakened, she gritted her teeth. I didn't come here to give you anything. The flame pulsed, glowing brighter for just a moment. The husks around it shifted, as if caught in a breeze that wasn't there. You came here because you want something, it replied. All those who seek the hollow house want something. A lost mother, a missing father, a reason for the dreams. You think I do not know why you burned the note? She froze, because she had. The letter her father left, the warning. She had burned it after reading it a dozen times. But she never told anyone, never even said it aloud. The flame laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. I remember all who have touched me, and I never forget a name freely given. The husks began to close in. One of them stepped forward, slowly, and something in Ella screamed, not from fear, but recognition. It was her mother, or what was left of her. Ella stumbled back, breath catching in her throat. The husk tilted its head, and though it had no mouth, the words came from somewhere inside it. You can free me, but only if you forget me. Ella couldn't speak, couldn't move. The first flame pulsed again, and this time it offered. Give me your name, child. Give me who you are, and I will give you back everything you've lost. The air trembled. Ella could feel it not just on her skin, but deep in her bones, as if the very idea of her was being pulled loose. The first flame flickered in anticipation, and the husks around her stood frozen in silence, as though they feared what would come next. Her mother's hollow shape hovered closer, fingers twitching, not reaching to embrace, but to erase. Say it, the flame whispered. Speak your name, surrender it, let the burden fall away. Ella's lips parted. She didn't want to, she didn't mean to, but something inside her, something ancient and aching, did. A memory surfaced, not a loud one, not even important, just her mother brushing her hair in front of the mirror, humming a tune with no words, a voice in her ear, warm and teasing. You were named after my mother, the strongest woman I ever knew. Ella swallowed hard, her fingers clenched into fists. Is that all I am to you? She said aloud. Her voice was barely a whisper. A name the flame did not answer. But the husks began to stir again, not closing in this time, shuddering. A sound like dry leaves twisting in windless air surrounded her. She could feel the pressure now, like the entire room was pushing against her identity. She felt her name slipping, not just the sound of it, the weight of it, the shape it made in her heart, the chain of it in her mind that connected every memory, every thought, every part of her that said, I'm Ella, and then, no. The word cracked from her throat like thunder. It didn't echo, it exploded. The husks reeled, the flame recoiled, a shriek of heat and pressure slamming against her like a wall. But Ella stood her ground. Tears streamed down her face, but not from fear, from fury. You don't get to take who I am, she shouted. You don't get to decide what I forget. The flame hissed, not with rage, but disappointment. Then you choose suffering. The ground beneath her trembled, and cracks split through the stone. Black fire surged out of the ground, not to consume her, but to show her. Visions, scenes, her mother screaming as her name was torn from her lips, her eyes wide with terror, and then gone, not dead, just erased. Her father begging something unseen to take him instead. Her own birth silent and shrouded in shadow, with no doctors, no lights, just the first flame watching, waiting, licking its lips in the dark. Ella collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed, and then she saw it, a mark carved beneath the flame, a seal. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. This was a binding. Something ancient, something placed there to trap the flame, not feed it, and it was weakening. Ella's name hadn't just brought her here, it was key. Her bloodline had been a bargain, a lock, and now it was beginning to open. The visions faded, but the feeling of them lingered like smoke in Ella's chest. She staggered to her feet, the cracks beneath her bleeding light now. Cold, silvery light, not the angry red of the flame. It was a light that did not consume, but bound. Ella's instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Not away from the flame, not away from the truth. She stepped forward, closer to the crumbling seal. The first flame hissed in warning, but it could not lash out, not yet, not fully. Ella crouched down, reaching out a trembling hand toward the markings carved into the stone. Strange symbols circled the base, some so old they were barely recognizable. Others flickered like they were alive, stitched together by the memories of those who had once guarded them. Guarded, or sacrificed to them. Her fingers brushed the stone, and in that moment, she remembered everything. Not just her own life, but the lives of those who had come before, the first witches, forging the seal from stolen time and blood, the desperate kings offering their own names as shields against the flame's hunger. Her mother, her father, not victims, but keepers. They hadn't abandoned her to the dark. They had woven her into it, made her part of the cage that held the first flame at bay. She was the last lock, and now she was breaking. The husks surged forward again, but this time Ella didn't see them as mindless shells. She saw their names, frayed and tattered, yes, but still there, still fighting, somewhere deep inside. The flame shrieked, "You will not bind me again." Ella's heart hammered in her chest. She could barely think over the roar of the thing, but one thought pushed through the terror. Names have power. The flame could steal them, but maybe, just maybe, she could give them back. Ella drew a deep breath. She closed her eyes, and she spoke. Not in fear, not in rage, but in recognition. One by one, she said the names she saw glowing like embers inside the husks. Leora, Bram, Tess, Malin. Each name cracked the air like lightning. Each name struck the husks like a blow. Not to hurt them, but to wake them. The husks jerked and twitched. Some fell to the ground, clawing at the emptiness where their faces had once been. Others lifted their heads, eyes flickering back to life. The flame roared, the ground shattered, and the seal, the last threads of it, tore. A column of black fire exploded upward, smashing through the earth, through the crumbling tower above, reaching for the sky like a claw. Ella was hurled backward. She hit the ground hard. The breath knocked from her lungs. When she looked up, the flame was free, and it was no longer a formless thing. It had a body now. Something tall, something wrong, something that looked almost human, but not. A thing made of hunger and old lies, and it was looking directly at her. "You chose," it said, voice like burning leaves. "Now face the consequence." Ella struggled to her feet, every bone in her body screaming. The flame creature, the thing born from centuries of stolen names, stepped forward. Its feet didn't touch the ground. It hovered inches above the shattered earth, trailing tendrils of dark smoke that writhed and snapped like living things. The reborn husks, now blinking and breathing as people again, cowered behind Ella. They weren't soldiers. They weren't warriors. They were scared, broken souls barely stitched back together. The flame's mouth twisted into something that might have been called a smile once in some other life. "You freed them," it said. "You robbed me. You owe me." Ella's fingers dug into the dirt at her feet, feeling for anything she could use. There was nothing. Only herself. Only her name. The flame's voice rumbled deeper, a sound like old bones grinding together. "A name for a name," it said. "That is the bargain." Ella shook her head, her throat tight. "I won't give you mine," she whispered. "I will disappear." The flame laughed, a horrible, empty sound. The flame laughed, a horrible, empty sound. Not yours, little spark. Theirs. It lifted one long, smoking hand, pointing at the group behind her, the people she had just saved. One life, one name, that was the price. Save the rest, or save herself. The flame drifted closer, the heatless dark of it making her skin crawl. Choose. Ella's mind raced. Every story she had ever heard about the first flame, every half-remembered warning, they all agreed on one thing. You could not fight it. You could only bargain. But those stories were told by people who had already lost. Maybe there was another way. She stood up straighter. "No," Ella said. The flame tilted its head, curious. "No," it echoed. "You said a name for a name," Ella said, voice gaining strength. "Then take mine." The flame shrieked in rage, a sound that cracked the stone around them. "Your name is bound," it howled. "You are the seal. You are mine already." Ella smiled, not with triumph, but with a quiet, aching sorrow. "No," she said again. "I was yours, but now I give it freely." The moment the words left her mouth, she felt it, like a string snapping deep inside her soul. Her name, Ella shivered, broke apart like ice on water, and flowed into the flame's outstretched hand. It roared in victory, but too late, way too late. Because Ella wasn't giving it her name, she was giving it everything it had been denied: consent, freedom, choice. And the first flame, ancient and terrible, did not know how to handle being given something instead of taking it. It faltered, it cracked, it bled. Ella's body sagged, barely staying upright, but she pressed forward. "You wanted consent," she said, voice barely a whisper. "You have it, and now you're bound by it." The flame screamed, a noise of pure frustration and fear. The freed souls behind her began to chant, weakly at first, then stronger. Ella, 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 her name. A gift given, a name shared, not stolen. The flame buckled, its shape fracturing into 1,000 silvers of shadow. It tried to claw itself back together. It failed. With one final keening wail, the first flame collapsed inward, dragging itself in the shattered stone, the cracks knitting closed behind it like a wound slowly scarring over. The tower shuddered, the earth heaved, and then silence. Ella dropped to her knees, too exhausted to even cry, but she was still there, still Ella. And around her, the nameless ones, no longer nameless, slowly, carefully, began to rise. The first flame was sealed again, not by chains, not by force, but by something it could never truly understand. Willing sacrifice, real choice, hope. The land around the old tower healed, but never truly forgot. Grass grew again over the cracks, trees bent their bows toward the sky, rivers ran clear. But where the flame had touched, the world wore scars, stones blackened beyond cleansing, soil that remembered fire. The freed ones, the former cinders, built their homes nearby, too afraid to stray too far from the place where they had been saved. They planted gardens, they sang songs, they spoke Ella's name every morning, so it would never be lost again. But Ella herself never walked among them. Some said she had died when the flame shattered. Some said she had become something else entirely, a spirit made of smoke and starlight, wandering the forests beyond. On certain nights, when the wind blew just right, children claimed they could see her, a figure crowned with embers, cloaked in ashes, standing on the hill where the old tower once stood, watching, waiting, not for danger, not for praise, just to remember. Because that was the thing about names, about memory, about identity. You had to keep choosing them again and again, even after the fire had gone out. Far beneath the roots of the world, deeper than anyone dared dig, the first flame still slept, bound not by iron or stone, but by a girl's whispered choice. And sometimes in the deepest, darkest dreams, the freed ones would hear it, a slow, endless hunger turning in its slumber, waiting for the day when someone, somewhere, would forget, waiting for the day it would be invited in again. But for now, the world was free, as so long as Ella's name was spoken, it always would be. In a distant village, years later, a child sat by a dying campfire. The night was cold, the stars were hidden behind thick bruised clouds. The woods loomed around the village, silent and patient. The child's parents had warned him never to speak to the darkness, never to answer when someone called from the shadows. But tonight, the cold was too sharp, the dark too deep, and when he saw the last ember wink out into blackness, he whispered into the emptiness, "I wish I had a flame." At first, silence, only the sound of the wind sighing through the trees. Then a single spark blinked into being. Hovering, listening, hungry, the child smiled and reached out his hand, and far, far below the earth, the first flame stared and smiled back. And, my dear dreamer, the first flame of Cinderella ends here. Hope you have a good night's sleep. Sweet dreams.